All right, class. In the second part of chapter 10, we'll be focusing on a little bit more about weight control. And here's a couple of definitions for you. Of course, we all know what hunger is. It's defined here in our chapter, the uncomfortable feeling leading to a desire to eat. That's a nice definition there. You may not realize the word satiety, though, and that's kind of a feeling of fullness that we experience when we know we've eaten enough. It's a sense that our body has the proper nutrition and we've eaten enough, and so that kind of counteracts that feeling of hungerness. And so, one of the questions, of course, of all time has been, well, why are we overeating if we're overweight, or perhaps even in the obese category? And we talked a little bit about the BMI categories before, but the question is, why are we have this tendency to become overweight? And so there's a lot of different factors that could contribute to that. And so this chapter kind of looks at a few that maybe you haven't really thought about. One is it could be hormone related. Hormones do a lot of things. These are chemical messengers. These hormones, chemicals do a lot of things in the body. And one of the things that some hormones can do is to help regulate our hunger levels and the feeling of being full, that satiety feeling. And so I listed out a few examples here. You may not have seen these before. Ghrelin, leptin, CCK, PYY, these are all hormones. And so that means they're chemicals that get secreted into the bloodstream, and that they have some kind of target cell that they find a receptor for, bind to that receptor, and have some kind of reaction or cell response after that. And so ghrelin is a hormone that gets produced and secreted by the stomach. And of course, it goes back into the bloodstream just like all the other hormones do. But it seems to increase the tendency to eat. And so this, we have to have an appetite really to drive our eating habits. And so this is one thing that we have inside our bodies that helps to drive the feeling to be hungry. Leptin, on the other hand, is kind of a hormone that's opposite of that. It's actually secreted by the fat storing cells that you find in adipose tissue or adipocytes. And so this hormone actually causes us to reduce the feeling of hunger. And so, these fat storing cells, it's like they start to accumulate the adipose, the lipids, and they can produce and secrete a hormone that helps inhibit the fat storage in the body and actually causes us to be fuller and decrease that feeling for hungerness. And so, there's been some research to try to find, some kind of weight control supplement or drug or something like that. And one of the areas that they looked at or have looked at is this hormone leptin. And so they, looked at whether or not individuals are producing enough adequate amounts of leptin, and maybe they need some kind of hormone therapy to control their appetite. But generally what they found is that it's not so much that they're lacking the leptin, it's more of a receptor type of an issue. In other words, they don't have, perhaps the receptor is not binding to that hormone chemical like it should, but there's usually some other underlying cause of, that leptin is technically there, but it's not working properly. Another hormone is abbreviated CCK. This is cholecystokinin. This is produced in your intestines, your small intestines, and that also has a tendency to reduce the feeling of hunger. And one more, final one, number 4, PYY. This is peptide. P stands for peptide or protein. YY, that is secreted by the intestines, and it also has a tendency to reduce the feeling of hunger. So, the question becomes, are we overweight because of maybe some kind of hormone imbalance in our system? Another possibility is maybe these natural bacteria, these helpful bacteria that we naturally find in our intestines, large intestines mainly, maybe they get out of balance, and that's called intestinal dysbiosis. When they get out of balance, that causes some other problems in our system, digestive problems. We tend to hold on to food more. We don't absorb nutrients as easily. And so that generally can lead to inflammation in the GI tract, especially in the intestines. And it also affects our overall energy. Our metabolism can be affected if we don't have the correct balance of those healthy bacteria in our diet, in our intestines. And so one thing we had to look at is what's feeding those bacteria. And so that's where the prebiotics come in, those basically food for the bacteria that we naturally found in our gut. And so we have to look at what's our dietary factors that would normally help the balance of these microbiota, these naturally occurring and helpful good bacteria. And so, they need fiber. And so are we having diets that are low in fiber, have a lot of fat? Are we having a lot of animal protein, a lot of added sugars? All of these things adversely affect the bacteria, the good, helpful bacteria in our gut. So we need to kind of look at our diet and say, are we nourishing those helpful bacteria? So what can we do to help that? Well, make sure we have plenty of fiber in our diet that helps these microbiota. Having things like yogurt or other naturally fermented food items, but yogurt and sauerkraut and different things, those are kind of the classic examples. And these help to restore some of that natural bacteria that we have. Food composition factors. Is this contributing to our tendency to become overweight? And it certainly can. And so you probably have realized, certain foods don't seem to hold you as long as other foods do. In other words, if you eat something that's got a lot of starch or a lot of sugar, or a lot of fructose type sugar, or a lot of processed type foods, and that's like chips and sweets and cookies and even breads go through a lot of processing. Anything that has a lot of preservatives, anything that has a lot of added sugars, all of these types of things, they don't seem to satisfy that hunger level very long, and so we have more of a tendency to add on more calories because it doesn't hold us, and so we're hungry in shorter intervals. Maybe it's genetic related, or obviously it could be multiple factors, right? And so there's been some research that suggests and has seen that obesity may actually be part of our genetics. And so there are certain characteristics that definitely go into our weight that's really out of our control. Even our metabolism, how quickly we are breaking down, going through chemical reactions to kind of break down and release energy. That can be part of our genetics, part of our hereditary type conditions. Hormone production, we mentioned those four main hormones. Just our overall body size, how we're distributing fat and storing fat and processing fat in the body. You can be exercising and eating better, but if your body is not able to process fats as easily, and so you may have a higher amount of cholesterol. Even if you're on a kind of a low cholesterol diet, your body naturally produces that, and so it just may be a genetic factor that's difficult to work around sometimes. What about some other factors? Your book kind of mentions this, and maybe not. We may have not have thought about things like environmental factors. We're talking about things like food advertising, right? How many commercials do we see and advertisements on the internet that influence our food choices? And so that plays a lot into our challenge of balancing our diet and energy and weight control. Any other conditions that are out there that reduce our physical activity? So it could be work conditions, or some individuals have a lot of have a demanding job and they're always busy, and so they have to eat on kind of on the road. They have to pick up meals, and so they have more of a tendency to have a less healthy meal or diet based on their work schedule or based on whatever other circumstances they have going on. They may not be able to exercise as much in particular situations. Psychological, for sure, that plays a big role. Our mood, our self-esteem, different society pressures and things like that. How many times have we, kind of been maybe in a depressed type state, or just a low mood type of a state, and we have a tendency to eat a little bit more, or we have a tendency to overeat, or we have a tendency to eat extra sweets that kind of make us feel a little better, because eating will actually help to boost some of those feel good type chemicals in our brain, that those endorphins, and those kind of boost our mood and our self-esteem. And so so there are definitely psychological factors that may contribute to balancing our weight as well. So section 7 kind of gives definitely some advice and some things about weight loss and maintaining a current weight. So maybe you've gone through some weight loss, and now you're trying to maintain a particular area of weight. And so the first kind of step is to kind of doing a self-assessment evaluation, kind of see whether or not weight loss is truly needed. And so you may want to do things like look at that BMI information and kind of get an estimate of a BMI that would tell you whether or not which category you in. Are you in healthy weight? Are you in an overweight category? Are you in an obese category? Definitely need to think about setting reasonable, realistic, obtainable goals. If we don't do that, we'll have more of a tendency to not continue with a weight loss strategy. We need to have some reasonable goals, and so set reasonable goals that are attainable, and that you can reach, and then reward yourself in some way for reaching that goal. Obviously, you need to follow a safe weight loss plan. You'll see lots of kind of fad type diets, or quick weight loss supplements. Be careful about things like that. Definitely consult a nutritionist or a healthcare provider if you have some plan to look at some kind of a fad type of a diet or other weight loss plan. And of course, our success and our goals here are going to depend on motivation. So find some ways to stay motivated. Again, take little baby steps at first and try to set some reasonable goals. That helps us to stay motivated. Definitely, trying to increase our physical activity is key. And so it's great to change our diet, but we really need to also increase our physical activity. That helps a lot of things, because that not only helps in weight loss, but it's also going to help in mood and helping us feel better just about ourselves. And so, and there's also some behavior modifications we may not have thought about. The textbook goes through, and I didn't list all the things. These are some of the main categories, but the textbook goes through on pages 406 and 407 and looks at some tips on modifying some things that would help us in our day-to-day goals for either losing weight or maintaining weight, such as planning menus or grocery shopping, food preparation, eating behavior, holidays, parties, all these types of things. So, for example, planning menus. If we have a plan, we tend to stick to it a little bit better. And so I know that, of course, takes time. And so try to plan ahead a particular menu, and then you don't have as much tendency to impulse, right? You don't have a plan for dinner. And so sometimes our response is, well, let's just go out, or let's just go get fast food or something. So try to plan ahead, try to plan a meal a couple of days in advance to make sure it's a balanced type of a diet. Grocery shopping. We all know if you're doing the grocery shopping in your household, you all know that if you go to the grocery store and you're already hungry feeling, you're going to be a little bit more, have a tendency to get those sweets or get those fast type of foods, even from the grocery store, overeat and things like that. Obviously, you want to make a list and try to stick to that list on your grocery list there. And of course, look at those food labels. Take some time. A lot of times we're on a busy schedule. We want to rush into the grocery store, get the things, come back out, but take some time while you're there to look at those food labels that we've been talking about, and look at things like how many calories, how many calories come from fat, how much fiber is in those food items. Food preparation, some tips there, trying to reduce the use of solid fats in cooking, try to try to use healthier type of fats. Try to prepare enough food for the amount of food that you need. In other words, not to over have not to have too much food prepared at one time. Be careful about proportions and portion sizes there. That's all very important. Eating behaviors, um, you know, trying to stay with a balanced diet during meal times. And in other words, try not to eat in between snacks. If you do need a snack, try to find a healthy type of a snack. And try not to skip meals. That tends to some individuals think they're going to just skip breakfast, and that's gonna help them cut out some calories, and it may for that meal. But a lot of times, what that means is then when the next mealtime comes, you're extra hungry and have a tendency to overeat at the next scheduled mealtime. So be careful about our eating behaviors. And it's always time for holidays and parties, it seems. And that seems like when we're trying to watch our weight, or we're trying to maintain our weight, that's when these holidays and parties seem to creep up. But we should just kind of be careful. Enjoy some holiday time, enjoy some party time for sure, but it's okay to limit and to try to monitor what we're eating there. And so one of the suggestions that they make is to eat a snack before going to some kind of holiday party, so that you're not going like very hungry there, and so you don't have that tendency to overeat. There's other suggestions also here about restaurants. We all have busy schedules, and so a lot of times we want to go out to eat, and so we have to be a little careful about restaurants. Definitely look at physical activity as trying to help us balance our weight and maintain our weight. Try to increase that physical activity a little bit. And so all of these are good suggestions to kind of look at our behavior and kind of find out what types of things we could modify. There's lots of areas. You wouldn't have to do every single suggestion in the chapter there, but find some areas. Again, set some reasonable goals, and try to find some areas that we can all work on. Section 8 changes gears just a little bit, and it looks at what are some medical treatments for obesity. And so you probably have, if you watch the news and kept up with some current events and things, you've probably seen a lot recently about weight loss medications. We're not talking about supplements. That you see a lot of that, especially on some infomercial type things. They're talking about, take this weight loss supplement. This is not a medication. But there are actual weight loss drugs, medications that can be prescribed by the your healthcare physician. And you may have heard of things like Wegovy or Ozempic or different drugs out there that help with that. And so that's a possibility there. But again, check with your healthcare provider and see if that is something that you need to look into. Some extreme cases, there are cases where some type of surgery is effective, bariatric surgery. And what this does is basically tries to limit the size of the stomach, or limit how much food can enter in the stomach. And so there's definitely some pros and cons about either of these type of treatments. Section 10 looks at, well, what if the individual is underweight? Because we're talking about weight management. A lot of times we think of overweight, obesity, but it can be just as a problem to be underweight. And so again, some similar type of factors can contribute to individuals that may be low on the BMI scale. It could be genetic related, just like being overweight. It could have some genetic implications. It could have, what type of lifestyle the person is living. In other words, are they missing meals because of their work schedule or their school schedule? And that's why they're skipping meals, and so they're underweight for that reason. Maybe there's some kind of underlying disease that causes them to lose weight faster or not retain weight or not absorb nutrients. Maybe it's an inflammatory type of a bowel disease that's causing them to lose weight because they're not feeling like eating, and they're not getting those the needed calories. It could be psychologically related, and we'll talk about some issues there. And so, the textbook kind of looks at strategies for gaining weight. Obviously, they need to increase the calories because they have a calorie imbalance, really. And so they need to find some calorie dense foods, but at the same time, make sure that those are calorie dense, healthy foods. So obviously, fats have a lot of calories there, but we have to be careful with fats because fats can, saturated fats can have other implications on our cardiovascular health. And so we have to be careful with what kind of fats we add to the diet. And so look for healthy fats, fats that you find in fish, fats that you find in nuts, and even seeds or granola or some fruits like avocados. Those are healthy, omega-rich type of fats. They still add calories, but they're healthier than a saturated fat would be. And that kind of leads us to the last main section here, looking at eating disorders. And so your definition there for an eating disorder is a psychological disturbance. It can lead to physiological or changes with our body function, the body's function, and it can have obviously some serious health problems, and can lead to other issues such as cardiovascular issues, or and can end in loss of life. 3 listed here. There's others that the textbook mentions. These are kind of the top 3 that you see probably more often: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. We'll talk about briefly each one of these. Anorexia nervosa, a lot of times you just see this called anorexia. That word anorexia just means lack of appetite. And so that's just a general term. But when you add that nervosa to it, this is where you're looking at a psychological disturbance, eating disorder, that's characterized by self-imposed starvation. And so the individual is basically starving themselves. They're trying not to obviously gain weight. They're trying not to eat, and they're withholding food and calories and nutrients from their body. They have a psychological disturbance, a fear of gaining weight. And many times, if it is left undiagnosed and the individual doesn't have help, they will start to lose and get in a very underweight category, an unhealthy low body weight, and they may have a very weakened, what's called an emaciated appearance, very weakened physical appearance. And most of the times they don't recognize that as a problem, and that's part of this psychological disturbance. And they continue to do things to try to help them to lose even more weight by starving themselves. And so they find that in general, females have a higher or more likely to have this eating disorder than males. Your textbook mentions a few signs. They sometimes have a distorted body image, or they see themselves as having a body image that is not comparable to others, and so that kind of adds to their illness, and so they continue to want to restrict food intake and starving themselves. They are very concerned, highly concerned about any kind of weight gain. And so they're going to try to do anything to avoid any kind of weight gain. They're going to avoid any kind of fats or fattening type of foods in their belief. And many times you'll see these individual with this disturbance engaging in some kind of purging of the food of the body, whether it's causing themselves to vomit after eating, because they finally eat. The hunger becomes so great that they do eat, but then they cause themselves to vomit and try to lose weight that way. It may be through the use of laxatives, and they try to increase um, their bowel movements so they can try to lose excess weight that way. They could be just excessively exercising, trying to get as much physical activity to burn as many calories as possible. This particular anorexia nervosa this particular disturbance has the highest mortality rate of any type of psychological disorder. It puts a very, as you can imagine, it puts a big stress on the body's physiology, including heart problems. Your heart has to have the nutrients that it needs, and if you're starving yourself, the body just has to have these nutrients, and so that could be part of it. But many of these individuals are psychologically disturbed, that they commit suicide, or they have some type of alcoholism problem with drug addiction or alcohol. The second we'll mention is bulimia. Also, here they use the word bulimia nervosa. And so here you have an individual that they have a binge eating scenario. So they eat a lot of calories, but then that's followed by some kind of purging, and it's usually vomiting. And so usually these individuals are normal as far as their weight goes. Their BMI would be in that normal range. They're not underweight, but what they would do is they would have kind of a high calorie diet at certain times. They're kind of eating a lot of sweets, cakes, cookies, all these types of things, maybe some high fat, high carb type foods. But then they get into a depressed state, and so they start feeling bad. They start having a depressed state, like a bipolar type of a disorder, personality disorder, and that generally leads to, again, purging themselves by vomiting. Again, you see this psychological disturbance more common in females. The last one here is binge eating disorder. And so this is a little different than bulimia, because this is where an individual may go through periods where they're overeating, they're binge eating again, but they're not purging themselves here. And so a lot of times these individuals may have other psychological disorders, usually bipolar. So they have continual kind of mood swings, or they're up or down mood wise. And so whenever they kind of have this downtime, this depressive time, that's usually when they turn to something like food to try to cope with some of these issues. And so and that generally leads to eating a large amount of calories at a particular time. A lot of times individuals do this when they have high anxiety, or maybe they have some other substance abuse disorders along with that. This happens to be the most common eating disorder out of the different eating disorders. And like I said, there's a couple more that's listed in the text, but this happens to be the most common eating disorder that we find in the US. And, the suggestion here is, if you have any of these types of symptoms or think you do, there is help out there. And so we, definitely need to look at some areas for assistance when it comes to eating problems. Reach out to some counselors. If you're not going to a healthcare provider, that would be a great place. Of course, they can have nutritionists or psychologists that can help. And then, a lot of schools especially will have counselors on hand that can counsel you, or at least, confidentially talk over some things with you, and perhaps kind of lead you in some directions there for help.